Yes, I suppose this should have been one of the short comments yesterday. Given the difficulty you've just all discussed of getting the word out, of outreach, of breaking through the barrier to people who are not already members of the choir, how do you think that news about the state of the water in the Potomac is going to impact people who already prefer to drink very environmentally costly bottled water drawn from, let's say, Poland Springs, Maine? I mean, you can scare them, and you'll scare them into doing something which is an environmentally worse solution. And I wondered, does anyone have any ideas about how to get them to act rather than, act as a group, as a grassroots movement, rather than simply by changing individual patterns and buying more bottled water?
It's an interesting question. I gave a talk recently down in Vero Beach, Florida, and there was somebody down there in an environmental organization that said the same thing to me. How do we go beyond the choir? I said, well, I would show this drinking water segment. I would try to find mothers between the ages of 20 and 40 and invite a bunch of mothers to watch this and then see whether or not they don't begin to get organized. I think you have to direct the information at people who are going to care about it and who understand that they can't do much individually. Just going and buying bottled water isn't going to do it. Everywhere you go, you're going to have to be dependent on drinking water somewhere, and lots of other people are. So we're going to have to come to a collective solution. Part of our problem is we've accepted the notion that the market is going to solve the problem for us. I'm sorry, the market isn't going to solve the problem for us. It hasn't gotten there since the 1980s, which has been the approach since the 1980s. We need to recognize that. We need to have people say that directly. We need to have people talk about that, and not throw our hands up and say we can't get anywhere, but get organized. The way people get organized is usually in their local communities. The Potomac Riverkeeper is on this case, and that's a very strong organization. And there are other organizations on the Potomac River that are eager to move on this. That's the way to get going.
Question over the other side?
Yeah, thank you very much. Especially internationally or in terms of policy, as journalists or as an advocate, whether with an NGO or with the UN, do you feel a pressure to, or is there a case to be made for framing the issue in terms of security as opposed to perhaps a humanitarian one, in the sense that, well, like the one in Ethiopia, the water wars, was that Ethiopia? Yeah.
Right.
That this could and is leading to conflict between countries.
This is the discussion that David and I have had for the last couple of years, that water and historically has often led to cooperation as conflict. Hillary Clinton did yesterday sort of use the national security frame to say that this was a very important national security issue for the United States, and that it had to be integral to all of our foreign policy because it could spill over into conflict. She talked about the 260 river basins in the world that cross borders and lots of other ways that it's important to make it a purpose. But David, you or Amy should address this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and it really gets to the issue of how do you break through indifference. And I think for a lot of people in this room, what breaks through indifference is the fact that 4,500 children will die today of inadequate water and sanitation, that 85% of all diseases are tied back. For other people, it will be women. The average African woman is walking 6 kilometers per day. For other people, it will be an economic argument that you cannot have economic growth if people are sick of this. For other people, it will be an environmental sustainability that 2.5 billion people today do not have a safe way of disposing of their bodily human waste. It's one of the most serious environmental. But you've pointed out, I think, the key issue that for many policy people, particularly in this town, one of the most effective arguments, and it's not a pretext by any means, it's very serious, is really a human security issue that could lead to conflict. Where John and I have had some good conversations is, I think water historically has been a bridge to peace. It's so important that people have to make compacts. If you pollute my supplies, I can pollute yours. If you can blow up my dam, I can blow up yours. The last conflict between sovereign nations, do you know how far back in history you have to go? between sovereign, again, you have the sub-national conflict like we saw here. You have to go back 4,500 years in history to find open warfare between sovereign nations because it's so important. That's why I think the better, stronger case is that to avoid that conflict, use water as a bridge for peace.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that too, because to address one of the elephants in the room, which is climate change. And, you know, many people would describe the issue that we face, one of the most pressing issues is not climate change, but the water issues that will result from climate change. And one of those, of course, is greater scarcity of fresh water. And so as yet another reason why we have to look at how to use fresh water sustainably. One statistic is 70% of the global fresh water is used by agriculture. And so, you know, the losses that are in place, the inefficiencies that are in many agriculture systems need to be addressed. On the salinization question, I'm not an expert on that myself either, but I would point out that the effects on human health are not just from fresh water. I mean, we've got issues, or from drinking water, I should say. It's also bathing, it's exposure through other means, it's also impacts on the coastal zone. I mean, you could think in the US of all the beach closures that have happened. So whatever the source, you need to make sure that it's, you know, that it's a safe source.
Thank you for your answer. That was very insightful.
Just adding to that, you mentioned climate change. It's forcing people off their land and disenfranchising people simply by making people relocate. You're creating a security situation. I mean, look at Bangladesh is one of the densest places on earth with 155 million people in an area the size of Iowa that's getting smaller. It's also one of the poorest places on earth, and it's predominantly a Muslim country. It's a fairly tolerant Muslim country, but there are extremist elements, and there are those that would argue that if you're taking poor people and disenfranchising them, pushing them off their land, you are creating an environment that feeds into extremism. I don't cover that in my film because I don't really fearmonger it that way, but I instead was very impressed with you know, sort of how they're handling their own problems and a sense of tolerance there is there, and have a lot of hope in that. But the security aspect of climate change, just from forcing so many people to become refugees, is a great concern.
Right. Well, in the interest of not missing our reception, why don't we just have the people who are standing here just quickly, we'll get your questions all at once, and then we'll see if we have some short responses up here. Maybe we'll start doing this side first and then the two over there.
Okay, I have a question for Amy. Given the importance of water, can you talk a little bit about the United Nations interagency mechanism on water, UN Water? What's the latest thinking in the agency? What are the latest efforts on the critical issues of water access and the impacts of climate change to the water issue? Thank you.
That doesn't sound like a short one, but this could be other questions. Why don't you go on? We'll do this side, and then we'll go over there.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a comment and question basically focused on easy like water. When the individual is going to the World Bank and to receive his award, I couldn't help but was struck by a little bit of the irony in the situation that the individual is getting an award for responding to a crisis that's caused by the global economy. And so and also being aware of the fact that the World Bank is involved with the climate change issue, perhaps with like carbon financing and working out deals so that the developed world can trade carbon credits to continue polluting them, and also involved in privatization of water in certain contexts like Colombia. So I'm interested in, that's a comment, the question I would have is just what is the World Bank doing to actually mitigate this crisis as opposed to give out awards?
Okay, one more over here.
Hello, my name is Christina Kohler with the International Water Association, and I have more of a general comment. I think a couple things that make water so complex is that it goes across so many different areas. So desalination and the carbon issue, climate change, well, as we come up with alternative energy sources, most of them are extremely water intensive. So there's got to be a more integrated approach, as you had mentioned, to the solution. A couple other things, the best practices, the International Water Association actually has membership of water utility, water professionals, wastewater professionals, researchers. We need more civil society folks involved, but this is a platform for the water professionals to exchange best practices and models. So encourage you all to get involved in that area. But one of the key things that I've noticed is that there are really solutions that are actually very progressive outside of the United States, and that we could benefit as much as providing information back. I have a few other things to say, but I just say, just come up and talk to me afterwards, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about how to get some, and we're working with a number of you up there as well. Thank you.
Great. These two over here.
Okay, Lori Timmerman, and the Ethiopia film really did show the impact of water scarcity, and just wanted to make a pitch for the appropriate technology model. There's a movement afoot called Design for the Other 90%, and Gates Foundation is funding in Ethiopia appropriate technology water center doing R&D on 13 small-scale, affordable technologies, and one of them is something called manual drilling. So it's an intermediate in between hand-drilled wells and the mechanical wells, and it's very affordable. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Great, thank you. And last one.
Monday night we had a film here called Gasland. Fracking is not subject to the Clean Water Act. There's been very little in the news about it. I wonder if any of you know why we don't hear much more about this.
I'm sorry, what is not subject to the Clean Water Act?
Fracking. We had a whole film on here Monday night. I want to know why we don't hear about this. It's Monday night, here in this auditorium, we saw a film called Gasland. Fracking is not subject to the Clean Water Act in the United States of America.
And explain what fracking is.
Hydraulic fracking is a method of bursting the underground substrate to gather the gas.
To release the gas, right. Okay.
And why isn't that on the news more?
Good question. So we had the specific question on the UN, the interagency mechanisms for water. I think that's probably an Amy question. Is that?
Sure. In fact, at this meeting I mentioned that's taking place in Nairobi, UNEP is in fact hosting a meeting for World Water Day with UN Water, which is the relationship of the various UN agencies to try to better coordinate what we're doing on water. And so they're actually looking at many of the issues that have been asked about in this room and raised on the film to come up with an action plan. There is a set of goals. One is called the Millennium Development Goal. You might have heard of these UN goals, and there is one specifically on getting fresh water, safe fresh water, to more people around the world. And I'm not an expert on where we are, but I know we're making our way there. It's definitely slower than it has been, but there's been a lot of progress simply by putting those goals into place. And again, trying to partner not only within the UN, but across the board with NGOs and private sector, et cetera. One plug I'm going to make, which I think is one of the most exciting developments that we're working on and many others as well, which is to try to put an economic value on biodiversity and the ecosystem, and something called ecosystem services. And in fact, because climate change and other environmental problems have been called great market failures because we put a zero value on the environment. So what we're doing at UNEP, and in fact this has been taken up by the US Congress in the Farm Bill, there's actually an effort now to look at that in the US agricultural system to make sure that we don't treat the environment as zero, because those market forces will hopefully drive better behavior.
And I guess, Glenn, quickly, World Bank, Sane or Center?
The question of the World Bank giving awards for adaptation to climate change, yeah, there are many ironies there, which as a filmmaker is gold, because you want to see those ironies. In fact, when the first day we arrived in Bangladesh, there was an anti-World Bank protest that we filmed, which was about them overseeing how climate change funding is administered there. But in this case, at the development marketplace, they do fund what for them, I guess, is small potatoes, $200,000 per winter to 25 different projects for people like Rezwan and his solar floating school project from all over the world. So it's a small way for them to say they did some good. But there was even some mixed feelings among the winners and losers about it being a double-edged sword in terms of taking that money from them and what it meant and the reporting requirements and kind of the history of it. So, you know, in not winning, it was, you know, maybe it wasn't so bad for him.
I had intended to mention earlier that part of what we do at the Pulitzer Center is involved with the Global Gateway. You see the banner over there, and that's taking the journalism projects we work with and the journalists out to schools and to universities across the country. That's a very active part of what we do in trying to engage the public. Jen has been out to high schools and colleges speaking for us, and Steve Sapienza has done a lot of this as well on behalf of the Bangladesh and other projects. It's a really important part. And today we have some fifth graders from Bethesda who are here, and we have some students, I believe, from Woodrow Wilson High School in the district who've been working with our staff, engaging with this and other projects that we're doing. And of course, that's our future. We put a lot of energy there because that is what's going to determine whether we deal successfully with these and many similar tough, big issues. The message I'd like to end with is the value of collaboration, of like-minded individuals and organizations pooling their resources and talents to extend the reach of their work. In our case, we've learned a tremendous amount about water and climate change from working with great filmmakers like Steve, Glenn, and Jen. And of course, for an old print guy like me, Rick Smith is the example supreme of what's possible when you expand your horizons. So it's great to be together with him. Water Advocates has been so vital to the Pulitzer Center's work on water, introducing us to specialists around the world, bringing us into partnership with National Geographic and NewsHour, and giving us a role in promoting Nat Geo's wonderful special issue on water that's now in the stands, as David said, and working with Fred de Sam Lazaro to produce a series of reports on water and sanitation that have begun airing on NewsHour and will continue over the next several weeks. Thanks to my great colleagues at the Pulitzer Center, you can find all this and more on our interactive portal, Downstream, that you see up here. And that's, as I said before, it's pulitzergateway.org/downstream. And we'll be handing out flyers with details to remind you of that on the way out. I hope you'll take a look. And if one of our colleagues comes up to you or one of these students from Wilson with a flip cam in the reception and asks for your take on water, I hope you'll join the conversation and get your voice up on this website as well. So with that, I want to thank all the filmmakers, thank all of you for coming, and do come join us. Join us for the reception, and I think that we're guaranteed that we're going to have no tap water over there.